Hello everyone, this is Christian Mod Exciton Interactive, and in this video we are going to basically take up where we left off in the previous video when dealing with ability to interact with the DOM elements that make up our control groups. Before I begin though, I'd like to remind you can find a link to the article for this video in the description below. And like I said, we'll start where we left off. So just to remind us, the last thing that we did was to gain access to the DOM elements that make up the control groups in our authenticator component here. So let me bring up my notes here. So the first thing we're going to note here is that what I'm going to do in this video is to deal with some navigation. So keyboard navigation, the user hits the tab key or the enter key. We want to be able to go to the correct input. And the one thing to note is that the makeup, so for most of the controls, they're made up of this div, which has a label inside of it, another div, and then the input and a button. And for these, the focus element is simply going to be the input, right? And the problem comes in with the remember me checkbox. It's not a problem, it's a slight complication, is that the input is actually hidden. We don't actually show the input. What we show is a label which has a span inside of it that we style to look like a checkbox. And so we're not actually going to focus the input on the remember me control. We're going to focus this label, which poses its own complications all on its own. But that's just, we want to keep that in mind here. And let's go back to Visual Studio to start with. What we're going to start with is modifying. Let's go Solution Explorer, and what we'll do here is, you can ignore those little signs there. What we'll do is we'll modify the control group first. So let me open that up. So if it wasn't for the remember me, we would just simply focus the input that's inside of the DOM element for our control groups. But since we have that remember me, what we'll do is we'll say that you can specify what's the type of the element that we're going to focus. So we'll do that by going to the interface for the I control group config, and we'll add a property to it, and that we'll call focus element type. It's optional and it's a string. Perfect. Now that we have that, what we'll do is we'll go back down here into the actual class, and we'll create another private read-only, and we'll say focus element type string equals null to begin with. Next thing we'll do is the same thing that we did with the group DOM. Let's come down here and say private and focus elements. One day I'll learn how to type. It's going to be of type of HTML element. It starts off as null. Right, and then we're going to do again the same thing that we did before. We're just going to say, and I realize I'm not putting DOM on the end of these things now, but we're going to stick with the way it is. And we want a private get focus element. Say if this dot focus element is not equal to null, just return this dot focus element. Otherwise, this dot focus element is equal to this DOM reader, and what we want to do is dot find child, not find child by ID, but just find child, and we'll say this dot group DOM. So that's the parent, and what we'll be looking for is this dot focus type. Perfect, and then we'll say return this dot focus element. And the last thing that we have to do is to go into the constructor here, and we'll say that this dot focus element type is equal to, and we'll say type of, and we'll say config dot focus element type. If that is undefined, then we'll have it default to input. So that's the majority of cases. Otherwise, config dot focus element type. And the last thing we want to do is to see that we have we have access to it. Instead of displaying the group DOM, we're going to display the focus element. Save that. Go back to the browser. Go to console. Down here. And you'll see that we're actually having the inputs. Of course, we have all the inputs, and there's the Remember Me input, which we don't want. So let's go back to the Visual Studio. We'll go into the control pair collection. The beginning here, we want in the I create pair config, we're going to specify or allow you to specify the focus element type. Again, optional, which is a string. Once we have that, we will just go down to creation, and in the left config, the object that we're using to configure the left control group, we will put in focus element type is equal to left.focus element type, and then we'll come down here to the right one, and we'll just say focus element type is equal to right.focus element type. Perfect. Save that. Of course, the last thing that we need to do is to go into the components TypeScript file, go to the ng after view init method where we're creating the control groups, and in the Remember Me we're specifying the ID. What we also have to specify is the focus element type, and for it is label, comma, save, turn to our browser, and you'll see now that we have all the inputs and we have the label being returned. So that's working fine for us. Make sure. So now let me think. Well, we're done needing to have this console statement for now anyway inside of our control group. So I'm just going to remove the console statement that's at the bottom of the constructor. Save that. Okay. Next thing, we're going to make a function here, or a method, simple method, says public, it's called focus, and all it does is say this dot focus element dot focus. Perfect. Now we're going to make some focus methods in the other classes as well in order to focus this input or the focus element for this control group, but we're going to need to have access to the ID to tell which one we're supposed to focus. And to do that, we're going to create a public getter, public get ID, and that's just going to return this dot ID. So that takes care of it for the control group. Next, we are going to go to the control pair. Okay. So now we want to create an actual focus method for it. Public focus. It will take in an ID, which is a string. And what we'll do is we'll use that ID. So we'll say switch ID case this dot, we'll do left first dot ID. So if the ID is passed in is equal to the left ID, all we'll do is say this left dot focus. Of course, this dot right dot ID. So we'll focus the right one. And we'll go ahead and put a default case on here that's just going to be an error. Let me copy this thing that I wrote. Of course, all it says is the provided ID does not match either left, and it tells you what the left ID was or right. And look at that error. It should be dot ID of the input group's IDs. It does not match any of them. Perfect. And I think that does it for control pair. We'll save that. And then we'll go to the collection. So control pair collection. And you guessed it, we'll create a public focus method, an ID of string. And all we'll need to do there is to say this dot pairs. Pairs indexed by the ID, focus, and that's a pair, so which one? Well, the ID Save that. Perfect. So let's see, we could actually test that real quick if we go to our component, authenticator component file. Actually, I think I might, we'll wait, we'll test it here in a minute. Let me go back to, we need to fix a couple things in the template. So we'll go back to the authenticator.component.pug file. First thing first, we'll go down into this label. So typically, and this is the label for the Remember Me control group, typically labels are not focusable. So we need to make it focusable. And we should just do that by saying tab index. And we simply put a number here. We're going to take care of all the tabbing. But also I'll just put a -1 here. And then we also are going to need to deal with the key up method on the label here. So we'll say, well, we're going to bind to the key up event, again, using the parentheses. We'll do the same thing that we've done previously. And all we'll say is that we're going to pass that to, or bind that to the on key up method. We'll pass in the event first and the control remember me key. Okay, so that's all right. So one thing to talk about, or one caveat to mention here that I've tested so far, is so the tab index, setting the tab index is supposed to make the label focusable. Of course, this being web programming, what's supposed to happen doesn't always happen, and there is a browser that is preventing me from saying this works perfectly, and you will be forgiven for imagining that that browser, I didn't even test Internet Explorer, but you'd be surprised to know that it's not Edge, Microsoft Edge that's the problem, it's Firefox. And I was looking at the developer documentation. There's supposed to be a way to specify that the label is focusable. When I tried it, it did not work, so I'll attempt to try it again. So I'm mentioning this to, just so it will know that this tab index doesn't seem to be working, at least for Firefox, the current version that I have. So we'll know that in the end. Maybe we do a workaround, fix it. We're learning here, so we'll decide at the end. I mean, the reason we're using the label is the built-in ability so that if you click the label, we don't have to do any work to make it check the input. Just make it 4 and then it automatically works. The ultimate way that we'd probably work around it is convert this label to a button, have it span the entire width of the container, and then just use a button, style it to look like the checkbox does now. And of course, then we use the click event handler to check mark the input. So, it's not a huge deal to change it. But now that we've done this and it works in everything but Firefox, we will go back to, let me save that, and we'll go back to the components TypeScript file, and we're going to modify the onKeyUp method. So onKeyUp, right now all we have is a default method. What I'm going to do is to specify a particular case, and that being if it's the enter button that the user has released. What we're going to do is call a method, and that one I'm going to call tab or enter. Of course, it does not exist in the current moment here, but let's go down and create it. It's going to be very simple for the moment. We'll say private tab or enter. And the only thing that we're going to do right now is just say this control pair collection dot focus and this control remember me group, just to make sure that we are able to focus the label, at least in a few browsers. So let's return back here, and it's rebundle or rebuilt and sent everything in. So now if I hit the enter button, I'll focus the username control. If I hit the enter button, it should focus the label, which it does. And cannot read property focus of null. So clearly I've made a mistake somewhere in the because I'm an idiot. So how does it work and then not work at the same time? Well, it does that because it just forgot to put in here. Let me just stick with the notes, whether I put break or we could return. Yep, and I return. So we forgot what I need to do is to say return here and return here. Save that. Go back to the browser. And we're injected a new code. Now we will hit the enter button again, and we're back to focusing the label, which is what we wanted. So everything's working so far. And the next thing that we're going to do, what are we going to do? Okay, so let's return to the template file, and we're going to modify how we're doing the buttons here. We're actually going to create a mix-in, because right now we just have, we're going to click, on key up. We're going to do all kinds of things on them, and there's no reason to do it individually. So we'll return to the top of our template file. We'll create a mix-in, cleverly called button. We're going to pass in the key and the text to the button for the moment. Eventually that text will be specified by a property on the TypeScript file. And here we'll say button, parentheses. We're going to need to have access to it so that we can focus it, the button. So we'll bind to the attribute.id, and that's just going to be equal to a couple backticks. We'll say key. This is a key get passed in plus ID on the end. And then we also need to deal with click. So we bind to the click event. Again, parentheses. A couple backticks on click button, parentheses again. What we're going to do is pass in the string. So we'll get our, two pair of single quotes, and inside of that, a $, curly brackets, braces, and key. Next, we need to put the text in our button, so we'll do that with hash curly braces and text. So the hash curly braces, yeah, we've done it before. That's a string interpolation for pug. And I think that we're done making that mix-in for the buttons. So let's return back, and we'll make the actual calls to them. So I'm just going to copy this in. Plus sign button, so we're calling the mix-in. The key is going to be button reset, so the ID will be button reset ID, properties anyway, and the text reset and send. We'll save that. Next, we will return to the authenticator.component.ts file, and we'll go back up to the top. We need to do a little bit of our DOM stuff here. Where do we want to put them? We'll put them right here. Private and button reset DOM. It's an HTML button element. Null for now. Private button send DOM. It's also an HTML button element. Also equal to null for now. Stop telling me that the name doesn't match. I'm aware. Ink, copy, perfect. And now we want to have the usual getters to get the DOM for those buttons. Also private, so private get and button reset DOM. The usual. Well, let me just copy this in. So if that button reset DOM field is not null, we'll return it. Otherwise, what we'll do is to say, let's make it a little bit easier to read. We'll set it. Again, we're going to use find child by ID. We'll pass in our native element from the element ref, and we'll define the reset ID. We are just going to tell it that it is an HTML button element and for our find child, otherwise it would default to just HTML element. So that takes care of the reset button. Takes care of my squigglies, and let's take care of the send button. Come on. So that takes care of the send button. Same exact thing. If it's not null, return it. Otherwise, look for the one with the button send ID. So now we're going to have to specify those. Let's go to our public. So we'll put them right here. So the IDs, we have the button reset ID, button send ID. They have some values. It doesn't matter what they are. And then the keys. Let's come down here. We'll put the keys with the rest of them. Wonder if that's going to bother me. That's not alphabetical later on. But so remember, we have the button reset, the key for the button reset. And you'll remember that to get the ID, we're just taking the key, the value of the key, button reset, tacking ID onto the end of it, and then that will give us this property. So we're done with those. Next, we're going to go down to the ng after view init, so where we're sure that the view exists. And I'm simply going to make a couple of console log statements. And what we're going to display basically is just the DOM elements for the buttons to make sure that we have access to them. And while I'm at it, we did make one change here. So I was calling the on-click reset button or method with the reset button, but we created a new mix-in for that, and we're just going to call on-click button. So we need to specify that method. So public on-click button. It'll be passed in a key, which is a string, and then it will do something. So we'll say switch key. We'll have the case, that it's this dot button reset key. If that's true, we'll call this dot on click reset. Don't forget our break here. We'll put the default in for now. Break. What I will do on that on click reset method now, I'm going to make that private. And I will move that down with the rest of the private things. Save that. And I think now we're set. Let's take a look at the browser, and it's rebuilding. And there we have our DOM elements for our buttons. So that's working correctly. And the next thing that we're going to do, I'm going to get rid of those statements before we forget them and keep them floating around. So let's just get rid of these console log statements. And we're ready to really start the navigation part of this. So let me go back into the template, so the authenticator.component.pug file. And so if we were navigating, if the only key that we were worried about in navigation was the enter key, we wouldn't need to modify anything here. Unfortunately, though, it's not the only key we're interested in using. We're interested in using the tab key as well. And the key up method is not the best time to be checking for a tab key. The browser would have already tabbed. And so what we want to do is to bind to the the key up or key down method as well. So the first one I'm going to do is the button here. I'm just going to copy this in. So again, the button, we have a click handler, and now we'll be able to deal with the key down for it. We're going to call the method on key down, pass the event, and pass the string key in. So that takes care of the button. We need to do the exact same thing for the inputs. What I'm going to do on the inputs, make them a little bit easier to read. Move that over. And same deal with the key down. So on key down, event, string key. Last but not least, we need to deal with it in the label as well. So on the label, we just put a comma, comma, and great. Now we have 5 million commas. So on key down, on key down method, event, and control remember me key. So that's the property, and it'll actually pull in the string for us. Okay, so that takes care of the template. We're going to save that, and we'll go back into the TypeScript file. And what we need to do is to specify the method. That method was public on key down is the same signature as on key up. Gives me a keyboard event. Perfect. In the case, or what we'll do here again is a switch. Switch on the key. We'll do case, and the case being tab. We'll just say this tab or enter. Again, we'll remember our break. And we'll put the default break. So what's happened, or what will happen now, is we'll be able to do something with the tab key anyway. So let's do, so enter key, again, removes it. One day, on key down. Spell it correctly. Try again. Go back up, hit enter. We're focusing the label. Go up here, hit tab, and we're doing nothing. Why you do nothing? And by nothing, I mean it's just doing the tab to the button in the form group and not what it's supposed to be doing. So we're up here, the input, key down, on key down. We're getting the event and the key. So we'll come back in, on key down. Oh. This is supposed to be event.key. So there we go. Save that. Too many keys floating around. It's rebuilding the bundle here, or re-injecting it. Okay. Once again, enter moves us to the label. Go back up, we'll hit tab, and what's happened is it focused the label, and then the browser says, hey, I saw the tab key, so let's move it down to reset. So that's the reason why we need to have this in the on key down, so that we can prevent the browser from doing it in certain instances. So what I'm going to do is say const prevent default. And we're going to return a boolean from our tab or enter method, and we'll say, so if prevent default is true, we'll say event.prevent default. To do this, we're going to pass in the event and the key. And of course it's complaining at the moment, but we're going to do the same thing, event and key down here. We'll go down to our tab or enter method here. It's going to take in the event and the key. And let me just delete this thing. So our test, what we'll do at the beginning here is scroll down to see stuff. So we'll say let's prevent default. We're going to say that that's true by default. And then we'll say return prevent default. Okay. So now what we're going to do, we'll do a 1 and then we'll copy in the others. We're going to switch on the key, so which element we're talking about. In the case of this control username key, what we'll do is we'll say if, and we'll say event.shift key. So if the user is holding down the shift key, for instance with shift tab, we'll say prevent default equals false. And else, oops, else is this control pair collection focus, and the one that we want to focus is the control password group. Perfect. And we'll put our break here. Okay, so we're saying if the user is holding shift and hitting tab, for instance, so shift tab on the username is the first control within our component. So where the user is going after that, we don't care. It's leaving our component. So we're just going to let the browser take care of the tab behavior. So that takes care of it for username. Let me save that actually. And we'll go to the browser. So we should have, if I hit enter here, we go to the password. If I hit tab, we go to the password and not to the button. If I hit shift tab, I don't even know where it went, but it's not in our component. We'll return back to the TypeScript file. And we'll do, let me copy in the ones that are all the same, basically. We'll talk about them real quick. So we did the username. And then if we're in the password, what we'll do is if it's shift is being held down, we'll go back to the username. If it's not, we'll go back to or go to the password confirm. If we're on password confirm, shift is being held, back to password. If not, to the we'll go to the email. If we're on email, we can go back to the password confirm or forward to the email confirm. And if we're on email confirm, we either go back to the email or we go forward to the remember me. All right. Now, if we're on the remember me label, it's a little bit different. Again, if we have the shift, we'll just go back to the email confirm. But if the form is valid, we'll shift focus to the send button. If, on the other hand, it's invalid, we'll shift focus to the reset button. All right. And so we'll have to do something if we're on reset button. So if we're on the reset button, we can go back to the remember me control. Otherwise, we'll just say let the browser handle the tab behavior, because we're on reset. If they hit tab, then it's going to go to the next component, which may be the, well, it's probably not going to be the send button, because if we got to the reset button, that means our form is invalid. But and then the send button will be disabled. But otherwise, if we're on the send button, if we have shift, say shift tab, we'll go back to the reset button. Otherwise, we'll say, let the browser take care of it. Let me save that. Return here. So I'm going to start. I'm just going to hit the enter button. So enter on the username moves me to password, then to control or confirm password, email, confirm email, remember me, and reset button. Now if I hit the shift tab, we should hopefully go all the way back. Great. And if I hit the tab key, it does the same thing, taking me down. So in this, I think that'll take care of it for this video. So in this video, we basically have some rudimentary keyboard navigation for our component. And I say rudimentary because it needs to be a little more complicated than this. In the case of when we're registering, we won't have both of the components or the inputs visible. So we'll be on the password. If the password is valid, we'll, and the user hits tab or enter, we'll animate it and then focus the confirm password. If it's invalid, what we'll do is we'll just move it down to the email. And the same thing for the confirm email. All right? So we have a little bit more work to do to make that happen. But I think this is a good stopping point again for this video. As usual, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch the video. And if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, please leave them in the comments section below. Otherwise, I will talk to you later.